The streamer is quite possibly the most misunderstood device commonly used in the high-end audio chain. Most people harbor the thought that the differences between streamers are either non-existent or very small. I had that thought reinforced by the idea that it's just a computer, and computers can be had for $500. Then I started testing them. The differences are pretty obvious on a good system, and I think meaningful for some of you. The Tidal Audio Arkas certainly makes this point. I need to open with some definitions. When I refer to a streamer, I'm talking about a box that connects to a local area network and does two things. It first requests that the streaming service send particular music to your network, and then, second, it converts the Ethernet stream of that music to a format usable by your DAC. That is, a USB output or I2S or AES. When I say server, I mean that the same box requests music from local storage, SSD or NAS, and then converts the file to a format usable by your DAC. Most high-end boxes, like the Tidal Arkas under review here, do both streaming and serving. I would argue that for most listeners interested in experiencing a wide variety of music, including reissues and new music, streaming is a transformative technology that puts it at the heart of a music lover's audio system. At least if we can make the technology work well sonically. Streaming makes music exploration extremely low cost, both financially and maybe more important in terms of time and effort. In all seriousness, my barber is a performing musician, and I always ask him for new music suggestions. They go straight into my Qobuz favorites, and I can try them later that day. The same holds true for recordings of the month on this channel, or suggestions on Substack, or interesting tracks that you hear at an audio show or music review in the Absolute Sound magazine. So, streaming is important for many people, which makes the streamer potentially significant. Before we attend to the Tidal Audio Arkas, I need to mention that Tidal Audio and the Tidal Music Streaming Service are completely unrelated companies. Tidal Audio having been founded about 10 years before Tidal Streaming came into existence. Tidal Audio makes a full line of high-end loudspeakers and electronics, including amplifiers, DACs, and streamers. Okay, at the end I'll talk briefly about usability and such, but I want to get to sound quality because that's the issue that streamers like the Arkas raise and address. It raises the issue because it's a streamer server that costs $27,000. Wiim and Roon and Bluesound and Apple and Dell have boxes that do this for $500 or less. They often include DACs. If you have a system price below perhaps $50,000, a streamer like the Arkas is probably not your best investment. That's saying it mildly. More basic streamers can do a good job, and it isn't until you're working on refinements to already extremely good sound that you might care about this level of streaming. If then, because we don't know the music you listen to or the sonic attributes that matter to you. All right. Let's get down to sound quality. I like to start with the outstanding qualities of products under review. As we say, if you don't think these standout elements sound enticing, then there's no need to listen further. We'll start with dynamics. The Arkas is the most dynamic streamer I've tested to date. As always, this is measured against our reference of the Absolute Sound, so I don't mean that the dynamics are exaggerated or peaky. I mean that transient and percussive sounds seem more like they do when listening to real instruments in real space. On Steve Reich's Music for Pieces of Wood, you can hear the initial strike of the sticks, but also the resonance of the wood and the decay of the resonance very clearly. The initial transient is impactful, but it doesn't distort to cover up what follows. On the Ginger Baker Trio's album, Going Back Home, The leading edge of Charlie Hayden's bass is beautifully rendered in a way that is ahead of other streamers I've used. The other dynamic element of the Arkas is the way it seems to open up some recordings. For example, Blue de Tiger's song Bluetooth is tough for many streamers and sounds compressed and slightly muddled. The Arkas opens this up. I still don't think this is a great recording, but with the Arkas it crosses over to listenable status, and you can now enjoy the punchy Fender Precision bass line, as you should. Now let's talk about soundstage and sound space. Two related areas where I find streamers are quite different from each other are the elements of sound staging and sound space rendition. Remember, sound staging is how the performers are presented on a virtual stage. Sound space is the presentation of the club or hall or virtual performance venue in which the stage and performers are located. As regards sound staging, the Arkas presents the stage as slightly closer to you than some other streamers, for example, the Antipodes Kala. I would say the Arkas sounds like a row D seat and the Kala 50 like a row H seat. Related to this, the Arkas tends to present the performance plane as coinciding with the speakers, whereas the Kala presents the performers slightly behind the speakers. It isn't easy to say which is right, but from experience, you may know you have a preference. Some other streamers will present a slightly larger stage than the Arkas does. With conventional speakers, it's again hard to say what is right. I thought the Antipodes Kala did a nice job getting the image beyond the speakers. The Arkas was good at this as well, perhaps rendering a stage larger than, say, the Aurender N20, but not quite as large as the Kala. With that in mind, performer placement with the Arkas might be considered more precise. When it comes to sound space presentation, I particularly liked the way the Arkas opened up a bit of soundstage height. Soundstage height is a troubling element of stereo since the mics are typically not placed to capture vertical phase information explicitly. Nonetheless, different systems present different vertical images. I felt the Arkas was less disturbing in this area than typical streamers, but this may be very dependent on other associated equipment. Soundstage width with the Arkas is excellent, though perhaps slightly narrower as befits the row D or near field perspective described above. Now, let's talk about impact on DACs. The theory goes that the sound of streamers relates broadly to their noise level and even more to their noise signature. Since some of this noise is passed on to the DAC, streamers can impact how well the DAC performs. Now remember here, we're not talking about audible noise, we're talking about noise that affects the D to A conversion process. In my testing, I used the Arkas with both the Berkeley Audio Alpha DAC Reference Series 3 and the Tidal Audio Chimera. With the Chimera, I was able to use the Tidal Link I2S connection. I also used the Chimera via the AES input. Those I/O distinctions seem subtle, though in the end I preferred the I2S, finding that the Arkas Chimera combination was the best I had yet heard with difficult, high-frequency material. As I've said, this is a key aspect of DAC performance, or what I used to call DAC performance, though it isn't obvious on all musical material. But on certain kinds of treble, like cymbal hits, the difference is very big. You might think that more dynamic streamers and DACs would tend to have a bit worse performance on this listening test. But more dynamic source gear tends to sound a little brighter, and therefore you can simply hear what is going on in the treble a little better. The Tidal Arkas streamer fits with this logic, as it's a dynamic streamer that shows you all of the detail its excellent transient performance can deliver. When compared with the Antipodes Kala, you'll hear a streamer and whatever DAC you're using combination that comes across as a little softer and more organic. For another reference, the Denafrips Terminator 15th is the dynamic DAC example with the MSB Premier exemplifying smooth and controlled energy. Well-engineered products often present a choice of outcomes that requires knowing your value system. All right, let me give you some background here. When it comes to usability, I found the Arkas quite easy to use. It assumes the use of the Lumen streaming app, which works very dependably, something which cannot be said for all apps. You can also use Qobuz Connect if you prefer, and you can use other DLNA apps. Tidal has formed a partnership to ensure that the Arkas is upgraded automatically to the latest software in these categories. This is actually a major, which is to say important, element of being in the streamer business. Technically, the Arkas is interesting. The Arkas is set up to allow I2S output to avoid doing extra format conversions. For example, I2S to SPDIF back and forth. So, Tidal wanted to go I2S from the streamer to I2S in the DAC, which allows native streaming of zeros and ones in the format used by the DAC itself. This means the streamer and DAC touch the signal to a much lower degree. There are many research papers indicating that every conversion does some damage, so one view is that it's best to avoid conversions if possible. Direct is better is the idea. Also, the streamer in this mode does not need to deal with the bottleneck makeup of midstream clock oscillators because these are only needed for SPDIF signal transfer. Tidal Audio also offer a SPDIF output, which some people like to use, rather than direct Tidal link because there's not really a plug-and-play standard for I2S. This compatibility also makes the Arkas a suitable streamer for those who have a DAC from another brand. The surrounding component quality of the Arkas, board layout, power supplies, and so on, are done at Tidal's normal but extreme level. All of these circuit paths are subjected to extensive electronic and listening tests during the design phase. All right, let's summarize. The digital signal chain is rather complex. A result is that it's somewhat difficult to understand and predict what technologies will do, and in fact, it isn't entirely clear exactly what all the technologies are, even when discussing circuits with engineers. In this case, we have a special computer, and computers are complex. In that context, the Tidal Arkas features some well-regarded technologies implemented in a practical and very careful way. In our listening, it was clear that the Arkas helps to address some of the big issues in digital in a musically engaging way that I think is state-of-the-art. I hope you've enjoyed this review of the Tidal Arkas streamer. If you have, we invite you to come back and join us again, and we thank you for watching.